before, we're just going to take it paragraph by paragraph, and whenever anyone is unclear on any of the actual words or has any commentary or if a thought is sparked, we're just going to speak it. And I'll start us off. And let me see, I think I'm actually going to have to pop over to it. Here we go. Making Sense of Kant's Highest Good by Jacqueline. I did not take Spanish. I took French. Mariña. Thank you. From West Lafayette. Commentators on Kant's highest good can be divided into two camps. Those who believe it is unnecessary, importing an extra moral addition to Kant's theory, one designed primarily to serve religious purposes, and those who affirm its importance for Kant's project. Those who affirm its importance have been observed, and we're dealing with the echo feedback deal, and so if we're not reading, unless we have something to say, let's remain muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was muted. I truly apologize.
It's all right. The other conferencing tools seem to have already licked that problem. This just happens to be an open source project that probably hasn't gotten around to coding that bit yet. All right. So those who affirm its importance for Kant's project, those who affirm its importance have often observed that Kant developed two notions of the highest good, one immanent and one transcendent. Silber's influential article on the immanence and transcendence of the highest good defines this transcendent aspect as the total realization of the highest good, and the achievement of which is beyond human power, and contrasts it with the highest good as immanent, which specifies man's actual moral obligation. He argues that the concept of the highest good as transcendent functions to maintain the normative character of the good, that is, it is the measure that man uses in assessing the limits of his capacity. On this reading, the highest good is transcendent. As transcendent is understood as something that transcends the powers of finite individuals, and as such is simply treated as a regulative ideal. Little attempt is made to understand the highest good as transcendent systematically in terms of its being both an unconditioned condition and the perfect or consummate good, and as such the ultimate telos, or is it telos, of the natural world. This has resulted in an impoverished grasp of both the concept's differences from and interrelationships with the highest good as immanent, as well as of its central importance in Kant's ethical system. I wonder if I can make this any larger, maybe by doing that. There we go. So here we are taking in Mariña's essay to help us understand Kant, and I gotta say, I found a song that's about 5 minutes that tries to summarize Kant's philosophy, and my goodness, every single line, every single lyric of that song is on this level. So I gotta think that reading Kant is either like eating dry erasers or it's like being on a drug, and I haven't quite figured out which one it is yet.
To me, this whole thing makes no sense.
Okay, thank you.
You know, the whole thing all the way around. You know, the thing is, when I first seen this meeting here, I thought he was talking about virtue. But then again, I started looking, and then it switched to Kant. But the thing is, Kant, part of his enlightenment or whatever, has to deal with virtue. So I'm still trying to figure out what's really going on. To me, I don't know. I read something here recently that made more sense than anything about Kant. It says that enlightenment is man's emergence from his self-incurred immaturity. He argues, this is Kant, that immaturity is self-inflicted, not from a lack of understanding, but from a lack of courage to use one's reason, intellect, and wisdom without guidance of another. Kant argued that using one's reason is considered dangerous by most men and all women. He exclaims that the motto of the Enlightenment is dare to be wise. Even to me, I find that whole thing sort of confusing, but he makes some statements in there I totally disagree with, and I find that to me that I find the error in his whole everything he's talking about, because number one, he talks about self-incurred immaturity. That basically he's saying that people create that within themselves, and I don't believe that to be true at all. I think that a person's, once again, I get back to this word, environmental habituation, is created by different experiences that anyone experiences beginning in their youth, to the people that take and teach them what's right and wrong, to teach them the religion that they may grow up in. There's many different things that affect, their, might say, immaturity or unwillingness. The thing is, when you're talking about immaturity, you have to be comparing that to somebody else too. So I don't think that a person is responsible for all that, because you're born into an environment where others have great input on creating the way that you are, the way you think, and a lot of things you do.
Well, let me ask you one question, Dave, and then I'm going to open it to Al and to Mike. Do you still get a kick out of sophomoric humor?
Who?
Sophomoric humor. Do you still get a kick out of sophomoric humor?
I have no idea what that word means.
It's Mike's turn.
Yes, I certainly get a kick out of sophomoric humor. And the more sophomoric, the better.
Good, Mike. Explain to me what it is, will you?
Well, let me see if I can give an example of sophomoric humor. I had many years ago, I had a book of cartoons about college life. And in one of the cartoons, it showed some students filing into the cafeteria, and they were getting coffee from this huge coffee container beside them. And one of them was remarking, you're right. I think the coffee, does have a little bit of a funny taste. And you could see in the cartoon, although the two characters couldn't, that the lid on the coffee container was lifted up just a little bit. And from under that lid, two eyes were glaring at them, presumably from the restaurant staff.
Out of the coffee container?
Out of the coffee container.
Well, that there sounds like I don't know what it sounds like.
Okay. Another example was where they were filing into the cafeteria and they were remarking how fast the line moved, how wonderful it was. And again, the students couldn't see around the corner to where they were getting their food. But when you saw around the corner, you saw what was set up to be essentially a long hog trough with containers and dippers set out for the students to ladle stuff in. So, I think that's somewhat sophomoric humor.
How do you spell that word?
Sophomore, and then you turn it into an IC at the end. SOPHMORE for sophomore. And if you take the E off and put IC at the end, you got sophomoric. Now, a sophomore is a person who is, well, let's say the soph comes from sophisticated and the more comes from idiot. Okay? So basically, sophomoric humor is that for sophisticated idiots.
Oh. Sophos also could come from the word Sophia too, from being meant to be wisdom.
Yes.
But then the more, I guess, would be, you say like an idiot, okay?
Yes.
So
Yes.
a wisdom's idiot.
Yes. But wisdom goes along with sophisticated.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it could,
Okay.
yeah. Just another definition of the word, that's all. Yeah.
Okay. Now, let me comment, a tiny bit on this paragraph. First of all, this is a heck of a lot more unpleasant to read than Tom Paine. Okay?
Yeah, I go along with that.
Yes. The lady is writing very much as professors are expected to write for academic articles. And she is expressing herself in long words and grand concepts. And the difficulty with that is it's very hard to bring things to life this way. It's the difference that David has sometimes talked about between knowledge and understanding. Only where David says understanding, I would prefer to use a term such as living knowledge.
Well, understanding is living knowledge. Understanding is living knowledge. I mean, that's sort of like, taking, one thing that's gone through my mind this past week is that the idea of different words have different habitat.
Yes.
And when you take and understand the habitat of the word, you not only see the word, but you see how it defines an action. So, the thing is, then you see it somewhat different than a person that's just reading the word and relating to the definition they have in their own mind.
Well, amongst writers, particularly fiction writers, you often hear the advice, show, don't tell. So, for example, if I were trying to explain a word such as beauty, I might start talking about roses or ballerinas or stars or swans. I would bring to the table images which manifested beauty as a way of explaining what beauty is. And I would view this as an example of living knowledge. And hence an example, I think, of what David means by understanding something.
Right. Yeah, the thing is, when you think of beauty, you think not just of the word and its definition, you're thinking of all the things that are beautiful, period. So you're seeing the word beauty amongst its actual action in life.
Right. And there is very little of that particular skill employed, at least in this particular paragraph. Now, but this is the sort of thing that you generally get in papers of this sort. Now, as I understand it, what she is doing is the following. There is this idea, the highest good, which apparently occurs in Kant's work. And I'm not particularly familiar with it, but it is presumably something which is considered to be important in his work. And apparently philosophers argue whether or not, when Kant uses this word, he understands something which is to be understood in some sense purely in terms of what goes on in this world, the phenomenal world. And if that's the way it's to be understood, then the highest good is to be thought of as something which is immanent in the world. Now, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that word correctly, Perhaps imminent is a better way to pronounce it, as Rami pronounced it. On the other hand, if the highest good is something which lies beyond the phenomenal world, up in the realm of angels and God, then it is something which is of a transcendent nature. And what she wants to do is she wants to visit this controversy as to whether or not highest good is something which is in this world or beyond it. That's what it sounds like to me offhand.
Well, what does he say is the highest good? That's the thing I don't understand. And I think that what I was reading before, to me, that was pretty much what, he was arguing as being the highest good, simply put. I don't know.
I think we're going to have to continue to read to find out. But one of the terms, just from browsing the essay further along, is this idea of the unconditioned condition, which I look forward to finding out what that's about, and the perfect or consummate good. So I imagine that the unconditioned condition, whatever that means, has more to do with the angels and God idea, and the perfect or consummate good would be the realization of the same, but within the phenomenal, meaning the ultimate telos, which is a wonderful Greek word. If anyone wants to look that up and share that with us, please feel free to go ahead. David said that few men will go here and no women would, which may have been a reflection of Kant's experience back in the front end of the 18th century. I'm so glad you've come to join us today to give us whatever observations you may choose to share here in this discussion. I'm going to advance and I think Mike, it's probably your mic. When your mic is on, with the volume of your speakers, that's what's causing the feedback or the sort of stadium effect. I'm going to advance the essay up by a paragraph, which also should allow us to see not only the start of the second paragraph, but the referenced works. Who would like to take up paragraph 2, the reading?
At the top of the page?
Yes.
Okay, I'll do that. Other recent attempts to come to grips with the two conceptions that have generally been dismissive of the significance of the highest good as transcendent. It has typically been portrayed as simply an otherworldly state of affairs in which God distributes happiness in accordance with virtue. Andrews Reith, for instance, dubs this Kant's theological interpretation of the highest good and characterizes it as a state of affairs that comes about in another world through the activity of God. The theological conception assumes the existence of another world in which I don't know, don't go for that.
Okay, here we go.
In which a system for distributing happiness and promotion to virtue is already in place. This understanding of the highest good has been rejected by many commentators for two reasons. First, as Reith notes, insofar as the crucial element in this conception has to do with God's activity, it cannot function as a guide to human conduct. Yirmiyahu, or Yahweh, whoever that is, quoting Gutman, notes further that given this conception, one wonders how there can be a duty to realize the highest good, since it occurs in another world and is something brought about by God's activity and not our own. For this reason, Yahweh believes Kant to have abandoned the next worldly account and substituted for it one in which it becomes a regulative ideal for conduct in this world. Second, proportionality between virtue and happiness and the highest good threatens the transcendental freedom established in the analytic with the foreign eudaimonistic element. As Reith puts it, it is difficult to avoid seeing it as a system of rewards and punishment. For these reasons, those scholars who recognize the importance of the highest good generally focus discussion on the highest good as something to be something.
Good, scroll up. Welcome, Hyro. We're into the second paragraph. I'm just going to finish that second paragraph and then we'll discuss a bit. For these reasons, those scholars who recognize the importance of the highest good generally focus discussion on the highest good as something to be achieved in this world and do not consider this otherworldly interpretation an important feature of Kant's system. Right, let me scroll back to the start of the paragraph. So already we see a number of different people who are trying to understand what Kant is meaning by highest good, and they're trying to rule out some dead ends here, I think, because there are those who aren't willing to take the view from above, as the Stoics would perhaps say in their philosophy, and those who are seeing it, one interpretation is being too limiting, so they're saying let's abandon that because the idea of transcendent may be, or rather the whole just trying to look at it as a carrot and stick interpretation probably isn't what Kant was getting at, although that may be what he was getting at. I don't know yet. Hyro, today we've got Elle Hiscox, David Norton, and Mike Taylor. Would you like to introduce yourself to Ellen and the rest of the group? I mean, I know that you know at least David and Mike, but you and Ellen have never met. By the way, let me give a little introduction. I'm sorry, go ahead. He's the guy who coordinates the payment of the bill for Central Florida Philosophy, which is the extent of the introduction I'm going to give. Go ahead.
Hello.
Hello, Hyro.
This is Hyro in Lake Mary. I'm in Lake Mary, and I've known Rami for 100 years already, it seems like. Well, since the good old days of Plato's Cave at the Austin, what is it, coffee shop or something like that in Lake Mary? No, in Winter Park. And Mike Taylor was there too, and Steve Hall was running it. The Plato's Cave philosophy meetup, or whatever it's called. That was when, since 2009 or so, or earlier. I don't know.
So far, since you joined us a little bit late, we were talking about just how we're trying to make sense of Kant and how Mariña has given us an opportunity here, an entryway into some of his ideas. And then the two basics of this essay thus far have covered the idea of transcendence and immanence with regard to thinking of Kant's highest good. And somehow attached to these ideas are the concepts of the unconditioned condition, and then the I'm going to have to scroll up a bit here to use the words of the essay. The perfect or consummate good, such as the ultimate telos of the natural world. Okay, and that's enough review. Does anyone have any commentary for chapter 2? Then we shall continue. Who would like to read chapter 3? I'm doing that same thing I was doing with pain again. Who would like to read paragraph 3? Thank you.
Wait, do we really understand what's being said here in any of this?
Great question. I was thinking it might even take a few pages before we start getting a clue, but
What?
if anyone has any insights with regard to the 2 paragraphs that we've read so far, go ahead.
I am troubled by my lack of insight as to the meaning of that particular paragraph, particularly where it starts talking about proportionality, which makes sense if I'm dealing with numbers, but I don't know how to apply it if I'm dealing with things like virtue and happiness.
Yeah, good point, Mike.
It's
So
kind of
later
like
on-
asking how heavy, which is heavier, brown or green?
Yeah, right.
Well, later on, just because I've peeked ahead in the paper a little bit, Nina's going to bring up the idea of the pursuit of happiness and how pursuing virtue may not always result in happiness, and yet virtue may be found to be preferable.
Preferable to what?
Well, let's say your happiness is dependent upon something that wouldn't be the ultimate telos of nature, but would be something, let's say, a little bit more sophomoric. There's that term again. So consider back in high school when you were a 10th grader versus when you were a junior or a senior, and how you thought differently over the course of those 3 years. The things that satisfied you when you were in 10th grader may or may not have still satisfied you when you were ready to get out of there.
During that time of my life, I was interested only in one thing, and that was hanging out with the girls and getting along with them, doing whatever I could, you know? I mean, when I was in the 10th grade or 11th grade or 12th grade, it's all the same. You know, as far as any kind of wisdom that I had then, I was totally lacking. So I can't say I had more as a senior than I did as a sophomore. I was pretty stupid, period.
Okay, well then we can.
Let me give a short example of the difference between virtue and happiness. Imagine you are a pilot during the Second World War. You are attacking an enemy aircraft carrier. Your plane is starting to go down, and you know you can either ditch in the sea and be rescued, or you can dive onto the enemy aircraft carrier, and you happen to know that if you do that, that will be very important to your shipmates who are in danger from the aircraft carrier. If you choose to dive onto the enemy ship and give your life, that is an example of virtue which will make you quite unhappy.
Well, if you're dead, how do you know if you're going to be happy or not?
You may be very happy in your next life. With
Well,
72
it's certainly going to make you unhappy as you're going down.
Oh, I don't know. Some people, you know, you take like Achilles. I mean, he faced death and it was nothing for him to, he was not worried about dying, you know. So many of the Greeks were like that. They didn't, to them, that was their life to take and even die. Because when they died when they were young, a lot of them were, you know, became folk heroes and they were remembered. Sort of like a martyrdom today.
It was
So they
very,
look,
yeah, It was very standard among the Norse, too, amongst the Vikings, that, as a matter of fact, in their whole religion, where they talked about the Norse gods, in their religion, it was believed that ultimately the gods themselves would be destroyed in a final battle. But the important thing was that even though the gods themselves would be destroyed, they would go down fighting. What was important was the way you went out,
The way you
not
live.
whether you won or not.
Well, that's right. But the thing is, what it was important is the way they actually lived. And you have the same thing today going on too in many people's lives, for the people that are not scared of the COVID versus the people that are scared of the COVID. You know, the people that ain't scared of the COVID, you know, they're not concerned about dying, because if they get it and they die, they look at it like that's the way life is. Or other people that have the COVID take and say, well, you know, I got to take and protect myself and protect my mother and my kids and everybody from it. And you have two different, totally different ideals there. You know, one that's facing death and not letting death be a burdensome to them, and the other is taking on all the things that are around death, you know, and absorbing it into their lives. Two different things.
We're kind of we've been exploring the binary results here, but let me suggest perhaps it's a third and perhaps even more common occurrence, and that is that which does not kill me leaves me scarred for life.
That what?
So, that which does not kill me leaves me scarred for life. So, in other words, you could catch the COVID and have it, not where it's oh, okay, I had that and I got over it, but it's I caught it and now my lungs are like as though I smoked for 50 years.
Yeah, but
I'm dealing with that.
that's going to be the same attitude that somebody's going to be worried about dying. Period. I mean, you find that with smokers. I mean, people that quit smoking, you got two different kinds. People that, well, they stop because they know it's bad and they just move on with life. Then you got the other kind of smoker that quit, and then everybody around them, they want to tell them how bad it is. I mean, you know,
Allow
that's
me
just,
to give two other examples. There's the case where a gunman who went into the emergency room triage area, and he wanted to take hostages, and the ER doctor came up to the gunman and held out his hand and said, "You hand me over the gun. You don't want to be hurting anyone here." Okay, so he does the virtuous thing, and then the gunman shoots the man in the arm that was extended out to him, and it causes such damage that the arm has to be amputated away. So this man who was an ER surgeon is now, he has one arm. He has to go find another career. Okay, that's one of those types of consequences. That it was the virtuous act to approach the gunman directly and ask for the gun, but then the consequence of that action resulted in a lifelong change to his experience.
yeah. But the thing is, it depends on the guy's mental attitude as to what he's going to take. Is he going to feel sorry for him the rest of his life, or is he just going to move on and go ahead and do something else? I mean, you have many soldiers that come back from, you know, from the wars and everything with amputations and, you know, missing limbs and all that other stuff, and they have the same choice that they have to make. Are they going to take and look at life in a negative form, or are they going to take and look at their problems that they have and then go on and do something with it? A good example, I don't know what the guy's name is, but there's a guy out there, a preacher, that has missing arms and missing legs. All he's got is a torso. And this guy, he goes and seems to be able to do everything, and he makes lectures and all kinds of different things. And he has a wonderful, wonderful attitude. But he was born that way. Maybe he's got arms. I think he has arms or something that he moves around with. But I mean, he's very limited in how to function. But once again, it's a matter of a person's attitude as to the way they approach life. You know, you're going to approach it to solve the problem, or you're going to take and approach life to worry about the problem and look at all the bad things that are going to happen. Those two different things happen. I mean, they exist in life, period.
Al may have a comment for us. I don't know. I want to make sure that she knows that she's welcome to certainly contribute anything that you'd like to this conversation.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you so much. We have a lot we're doing around the house, and I certainly want to I guess contribute more, but if I can just sort of have it on as I'm doing things and then contribute a little bit, is that all right?
It's
Perfectly
wonderful.
fine. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's a hard time here, but thanks. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, so I want to see how much we can get through in 2 hours. So if it's all right with everyone, let's proceed to.
Well, you got this 2
paragraph
hours.
3.
It's not an hour tonight, is that it?
Well, you can drop out anytime you like, Dave.
Oh, okay.
And
Well, I know
I'll
usually you've been doing it for an hour. That's why.
yes, for the Thomas Paine, we've been doing it for an hour, and the recording only lasts for an hour. So we're going to take a brief intermission around 8 p.m. and then we'll pick it up for a few minutes, 5-10 minutes after that. And I'll have both parts posted online. So if you don't want to be a part of the second hour, feel free between now and the next session to listen to the second part. Just if you want to stay up to date, and we'll have on our next scheduled reading, we'll pick up wherever we leave off this evening. Who would like to read paragraph 3? Mike, would you be interested?
All right. It is important to note that on this account, empirical elements, namely happiness, are simply transferred to another worldly dimension. I will argue, however, that a systematic exposition of how the highest good as transcendent differs from the highest good possible in the world reveals there really is no place for these empirical elements outside of the phenomenal world. Reith's account and others like it thus provide us with a defective conception of the highest good as transcendent. No doubt Kant is himself partially responsible for such a state of affairs, since he sometimes simply extended the empirical conditions present in this life, the need for empirical happiness, into the next. This is particularly true of early accounts of the highest good developed by Kant in the later sections of the Critique of Pure Reason and of some of Kant's statements in the second critique. Nevertheless, as I hope to show in this paper, Kant finally arrived at a definite systematic understanding of the differences between the highest good as transcendent, that is, as an, and I'm at the end of the page now. All right. As an unconditioned condition, and the highest good in the world in which the two are sharply distinguished when the highest good is thought of as immanent. It is a synthetic concept composed of virtue and empirical happiness. However, the highest good in its transcendent aspect is such that both its components must transcend the world of sense. A considered view of Kant's mature views on the subject will show that we cannot really make sense of the highest good as immanent without referring to its transcendent sense. The highest good in the world has meaning only insofar as it refers to its ultimate telos, itself standing outside the world of sense. This implies that the highest good as transcendent is its principal and more important sense. and she used the wrong spelling of principle in that last sentence.
It's always the danger when you write papers.
I am not sure at all what this paragraph means. The only thing I can get from it at this point is she's going to show that somehow or other transcendent plays a very important role in what we're talking about, and we somehow or other cannot leave it out whenever we discuss highest good. Now, the problem that I tend to have with what's going on here goes back to a question that David raised. What do we mean by highest good? I am not even sure that there necessarily is a highest good, although I could...
Pero no se ve porque también estoy haciendo lo que tú estás haciendo. Mirando lo que hay que votar, arreglar, he estado haciendo cosas así.
Pyro, please mute. Thank you.
Okay, so my problem is, what is the highest good? And does such a thing even exist? And if there is such a highest good, what does this word highest mean? Why should there amongst goods be a highest one?
I've got to imagine that the fact that the word empirical was placed in italics, prefacing the word happiness. What is empirical happiness? I mean, is there a happiness for worms, and then a happiness for human beings, and somehow we are to place the happiness of human beings above the happiness of a worm? I think that's generally the case if you like to go fishing.
I think empirical here, in some sense, is talking about the phenomenal. It's talking about the things that we experience in what we refer to as the real world, the physical world.
And again, because I did skip ahead and look further into the paper, we're going to find the synthetic concept composed of virtue and empirical happiness. It's going to be filled in later on here. So what I'm seeing Mariña do later in this paper is that she shows how Kant found a way to not only make peace, but to create a sort of synthesis between virtue and empirical happiness, between like how to be happy knowing that you're about to slam into the deck of that aircraft carrier. Does anyone else have anything to say with this paragraph, or can we move forward into the fourth paragraph?
The other thing I got to say is I really don't understand this too much. Number one, they're talking about a synthetic concept. I mean, I don't understand why people talk about things that are synthetic. Why not talk about stuff that's real? You know, it's talked about virtue and composed of what happened.
Right. Well,
when they talk about synthetic, I think what they have in mind, at least part of the time, is that you are combining different ideas, and that when one talks about analysis and thinking in an analytic manner, what you mean is you're looking at a situation and you're breaking it into small parts and trying to understand each of the parts in order to understand the situation as a whole.
Thank you, Mike. I brought up the definition for telos, which I think is also going to help us. And I think it may help you see some of the point of why we're studying this, especially in the example of telos, if you could read that for us, because it speaks in a way to the situation that we find ourselves in, or found ourselves in for much of our life here in this nation. David, would you be so kind as to read to us the example sentence for telos?
What, are you asking me?
Yes,
Hold on.
please.
Hold on a second. I can hardly read. It's too small. I can't read that. It's too small. That's better. Okay, it says an ultimate object or aim. The hedonistic life, people lose some moral purpose. Telos, which provides a moral justification for the society. They come from the Oxford, I guess Oxford Dictionary, maybe. From Oxford Languages. I don't know what that means. Telos is a Greek word, I think, though. I was just taking and trying to take and look up the English word for telos. Does anybody know that?
Purpose. Purpose.
Purpose?
Yeah.
Okay.
At least that's the way that I tend to think of it. You might, for example, have a woman who is taking care of a family who someday suddenly decides to herself that taking care of her family was the purpose for which she was born. In some sense, that is her telos.
Okay.
For me, this delves into the idea of man's search for meaning. If all we were going on was something like the idea of preserving self-evident life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, British people think the pursuit of happiness is kind of silly. Of course, they might not have all the liberty that we have, so they may not allow themselves the opportunity to think in that direction. But they know that they're within a system and they're there to perform a function. So perhaps more in the European or the continental idea of philosophy, the idea is, what is my meaning here? And it can't just be the fulfillment of pleasure. I mean, if that's all there is, then that shapes a kind of world that I think becomes internal, self-fulfilling, and ultimately destructive, which would, I think, be a way of saying not the highest good, a kind of good, but sort of a base good. In other words, it doesn't look beyond the self.
There are some people who tend to think that the most important thing in life is the pursuit of happiness. In some sense, what they are saying is that happiness is the telos of their lives. My own experience has been that I am not necessarily all that happy if I'm just trying to do something that makes me happy. I find I am much happier if I'm working on some project which I feel is significant, even though I may find myself in a state of extreme frustration and unhappiness in the project because I can't get things to work the way I want to. Nevertheless, on some level, that is much more satisfying than going off and just relaxing.
Oh, if I may say, I agree with you so much. I certainly find that just I don't want happiness. I really want satisfaction from works well done and from, I guess, work well done. And if it leads me somewhere on a higher scale of ethics, morality, performance, it's all right if there are little downs in between. Or I agree with you very much. Yes.
In connection with this, I might point out Mark Twain at some point said, in connection with the idea of dying and going to heaven, that he thought sitting around on a cloud all day and playing the harp was extremely unappealing.
Yes, I have thought sometimes if there really were such a thing, it might be a little bit like, something very, somewhere you really might not want to be, and it would be, yeah, kind of like that. Yeah.
It may be that when we get to heaven, we will discover that in a true heaven, there has to be a certain amount of pain.
I don't know if, you know, I just did some looking up here in the Greek, my Greek reference book here, and the thing is, the Greek word for telos, they refer to as the end, as an end. Okay, and it's used in biblical translation. In English words, number one is end. It's used 35 times. It's used as custom, 3 times, ending and finally. So, to me, it looks like telos means the end result or something.